Christine. I'm one of the second-year graduates. I'm going to be presenting on human trafficking. I do want to start off with just saying that there are people who are specifically trained and in service to teach about this topic, and obviously I'm not qualified to do so, but this is just going to be like an introduction and just to raise awareness that this is an issue going on everywhere in the United States and including our country. So our objectives today, we will define human trafficking. We will talk about how somebody can become a victim of human trafficking, how we can identify a victim in our ED, and how we can help victims and point them towards resources for their rehabilitation. So first, United Nations defines human trafficking as recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of a person by improper means, such as force, abduction, fraud, or coercion for an improper purpose, including forced labor or sexual exploitation. Basically, it's a modern-day there are 3 elements that need to be identified to meet the international and federal legal criteria for trafficking for a person to get prosecuted or be considered human trafficking. This is the AMP model, which is in Russia, and it includes the act, which refers to the government being means, which include ways in which a person is acquired or ways in which control is maintained. And purpose describes the reason or intent behind the exploitation, so either for labor purposes or for sexual exploitation. There is an exception for minors, so minors don't have to fit any of these criteria. If a minor is engaging in commercial sex exploitation, even if it's voluntary, that's considered human trafficking. So it is going on everywhere in the world around us, and it doesn't always make headlines, but these are just some headlines. So Portsmouth lawyer arrested on human trafficking charges. This man was trafficking girls as young as 15, 16 years old, many years, and nobody felt comfortable coming forward because this was a man of power and they didn't think anything would happen to him. 10 women, 3 children found in Kansas City area human trafficking operation, 45 missing children rescued, and 97 people involved arrested in Ohio's largest human trafficking operation ever. And of the 177 people, a lot of them were just regular people. One of them was actually a pastor in a church. And inhumane exploitation, California store owners forced them to work long hours, sleep in closets, bathe in a bucket. And in this case, there was a couple who owned a liquor store in California. They went to India for the sole purpose of finding people to work for them free. They promised these people a great life, good salary, ability to travel, and then once the person got to the United States, they took away the documents, took away they had no money, and nowhere else to go. So just some statistics. There are about 20 to 40 million people being trafficked worldwide. That is a big range, and we don't have an accurate number because so many cases go underreported. Only 0.04% of victims are identified. Of those millions of people, 91% are women, 33% are minors, and most start at an average of 12. Another shocking statistic is that 40% of victims in America are African Americans, and this is 4 times the percentage of their representation in the total population, whereas 25% are white people, and white people make up the majority. So it is biased more towards races. And Another shocking statistic is that human trafficking earns about $150 billion a year. Of that, of the total millions of trafficking, 19% is sex trafficking, whereas the rest is labor. But sex trafficking makes up 66% of global profits, about $99 billion. And prosecutions for these crimes are very low. So even though it's going on everywhere, only about 15,000 got prosecuted in 2016, and of those, only 9,000. This is just a map that shows hotspots for human trafficking in the United States. As you can see, a lot of it is centered around large cities where prostitution is prevalent, where there's major international airports and tourism is popular. And Ohio is a big place for human trafficking because it's close to Canada and there's a lot of truck stops there. And in the United States, the most common form of human trafficking is sex trafficking, where in the world it So I'm just going to talk about how somebody can become a victim of human trafficking, and in their lingo it's called grooming. So grooming is to prepare or train someone for a particular purpose, and in this case it's grooming for sexual exploitation. So first step is finding a victim, a target. There's a big myth about human trafficking that most people think that people are kidnapped into it and forced, and of course that does happen. There was a case last month in Leeds where a teenager was abducted and held in a basement and drugged and forced to have sex for weeks on end. So that does happen, but in reality, most human traffickers use psychological means, tricking, defrauding, using coercion, manipulating, threats, in order to get their victims to do what they do. A lot of victims know the trafficker. Sometimes it's their parents, sometimes it's a spouse, sometimes it's a different family member, boyfriend, girlfriend, and then some other risk factors that can make a victim an easier target is a runaway or homeless child in the foster care system, juvenile justice system, child with disabilities, the LGBTQ community, refugees, immigrants, and non-English speaking people, and people living in poverty. So after they've found a target, their next mission is to gain trust and obtain more information about them. This is done through casual conversations. A lot of traffickers and pimps, they do mix well with just normal people, wouldn't really know that this is trafficking. And after gaining trust and obtaining information and seeing what this victim needs, they fill a need. So the target is usually somebody who is vulnerable and has some sort of need that the trafficker can fulfill to then have a hold on this person. For example, substance abuse, other things like poverty, they'll give them gifts, they'll buy them alcohol, they'll buy them drugs, provide housing, clothing, shelter, or even start a relationship. There are cases of interviews that I watched where there was a woman on a train and she said there was a male who came up to her and said that you're beautiful, and she was never told that before, so already she was hooked. So filling the need can come in so many different forms. After they've been filling this need, the next step is isolating them from friends and family. The trafficker starts to play a major role in the victim's life, and basically makes it so that the victim has no one to turn to help, and that's when the abuse starts. So At this point, the trafficker starts to demand that the service and gifts and housing and security and whatever else is provided be paid back through sex as like a payment for service. And they maintain control by threatening, blackmailing. They can threaten people's families and say that I will kill your children. And during this phase is when something like seasoning occurs, is what they call, and it's a combination of psychological manipulation, intimidation, gang rape, sodomy, beatings. They deprive them of food, water, basically torture. I had attended a human trafficking seminar a few years back, and one of the detectives mentioned the book, Apology, the 48 Laws of the Game. It's written by a pimp who started this life when he was 16 years old. He was trafficking women at that age and making millions of dollars. Eventually, he spent a lot of time in jail, but he was very successful in the trafficking industry and wrote a book on it. And this is just to show you from his perspective on everything that we just spoke about. Sorry for some of the language. So basically, keep people in arrears, prey on the weak. There's no real love, and get into people's heads, and the game is to be sold. So he speaks about in the book how he trades people and sells people. And another thing that is making the sex trafficking industry more prevalent nowadays is internet. So it used to be Backpage and Craigslist. Backpage has since been taken down. Now traffickers can contact even children through games like Silk Road, Fortnite, and children are the most vulnerable, and there is direct lines of communication. So it's important to what your kids are doing online to prevent them from becoming a victim of human trafficking. So there's this quiz on Rush Review. It's one of the new Boost exams called Quiz for a Cause. It's free, it's about 40 questions, and it's pretty educational on this topic as well. I think that it's important for us to be aware that human trafficking exists, that there are victims all around us, that many other patients are victims, and that we don't even know it. So I'm going to talk about some red flags and ways that we can potentially recognize who's a victim of trafficking. I think we're in a unique position to help since we are first-line medical providers. It's been shown that about 88% of victims of human trafficking access medical care at some point. And most of the time it's in the ED, it's in urgent cares or Planned Parenthood. And it's not always obvious. Some of the obvious ones are sexual assault and rape cases, and apparently a lot of these cases, these are victims of human trafficking, and we don't really find out because this is disclosed to a social worker or to the displayer, to the same nurse. But other times they come in for decompensating chronic medical conditions, somatic manifestations of stress like migraine and belly pain. Basically, anybody can get done. There's ways that we can there's things that can clue you in. So I will start with one of the cases. So a 20-year-old woman presents to the ED with pelvic discomfort and abnormal vaginal discharge for several days. She's accompanied by a man who appears to be in his 40s, and she introduces as her uncle. She requests that he remain in the room during the evaluation. Review of the hospital's EMR reveals that she has been treated for STIs 6 times over the past year. Physical exam reveals a young woman with a flat affect, echymosis scattered over her extremities, and a tattoo on her back with daddy. Pelvic exam is significant for purulent discharge. Then, this question, a homeless teenage girl presents to the ED is found to be pregnant. We suspect she is a victim of human trafficking. Which of the following supports your suspicion? A, the tattoo that the girl is reluctant to talk about. She's traveling with a friend. The individual accompanies her to wait in the waiting room, or the patient is later sexual. So things to look out for and red flags in patient population that may suggest that a person is a victim of human trafficking. So some things are if a person is accompanied by somebody who is older, somebody who is speaking for them or translating for them, somebody who says a family member, and the patient looks as if they are not making their own decisions or not speaking on their own behalf. Somebody who has scripted stories or inconsistent stories, somebody who avoids eye contact, appears depressed or fearful and hypervigilant. Markings, tattoos, a lot of pimps brand people they are trafficking, so burns, scars, tattoos that say property of. There was a case where a victim came into the ED with her boyfriend for back pain. She was examined with all her clothes on and discharged with NSS. Several days later, this boyfriend pushed her out of the car and the patient came back in traumatic breast. And later on, forensic exams showed that she had a tattoo that said property of. So it's important to observe this exam because that can also prevent. Here we have another question. 20-year-old Thai woman presents to a called her clinic desiring contraception. She's accompanied by a man who appears to be in his 30s who states he is her uncle and her. They did not provide any identification and paid for the visit in cash. Her address on the intake form is listed as a post office box. Her uncle states that she has had multiple unplanned pregnancies, subsequent abortions, and wishes to obtain long-acting. During the visit, despite your attempts to communicate with the patient, she keeps her eyes averted to the floor. Her uncle asserts that she is shy and doesn't like doctors. You're suspicious that she may be a victim of human trafficking. What is your next best step to care for this patient? So A, call the police and have the patient and interviewed. B, check for STDs and make a follow-up appointment for birth control. C, place the long-acting versatile contraceptive device as requested. D, using the excuse of needing to collect a urine sample, isolate the patient and test the communication. So after you've identified a red flag, it's important to talk to the patient. And if they are with somebody who is talking for them, it's important to kind of get them in a private location and talk to them one-on-one. The way we can do this is to you can walk them to the bathroom, say you have to collect a sample, like walk them to X-ray, you can take them to the gyne. You also want to minimize the amount of staff that's interacting with the patient. So sometimes when we have a junior resident, a pre-attending, and attending, sometimes the patient is physically assaulted, head trauma is brought in through CPT, and then they have to speak to the same nurse, they have to talk to the social worker, they talk to the EMT, sometimes police. That's already 8 interactions, 8 times that they have to tell their story. So the least amount of staff that we have obtaining history and talking to the patient, better it is for them in the long run and healing and just in general. You also want to establish a trustworthy patient-physician relationship and ensure confidentiality. You want to make them feel comfortable and make sure that they feel that they're not going to be judged with whatever they tell you. You do want to ask some tough questions, but start with just casual conversation and just our basic questions, and then you can go into questions like, where do you sleep? What are your working and living conditions like? Has anybody physically harmed you? Have your identification documents been taken away? Has anybody ever asked you to have sex in exchange for money and shelter? And And after you've interviewed them, physical exam, like I said, is free. So look for signs of bruising, other signs of physical abuse, starvation, dehydration, branding, tattoos, ask about suspicious marks. In certain cases where you're doing a gyne exam, you can look for signs of genital trauma, STD. An 18-year-old woman comes into the emergency department for treatment of vaginal discharge. She's evaluated and treated for chlamydia, gonorrhea, and trichomonas. Blood work is sent for HIV, syphilis, and hepatitis. You notice in her chart that she has been seen 8 other times this year for treatment of STDs. You ask her what she's been using for contraception, and she says she often does not use protection because she's not allowed to insist on it. She eventually reveals that she ran away from an abusive foster care last year and currently lives with forces her to commercial sex. She says her boyfriend and clients do not physically harm or threaten her. So she doesn't want to leave her boyfriend at this time and does not want to reach out to referral services. Which of the following is the next best step in management of this patient? A, call the local police department. B, call the National Human Trafficking Resource Center hotline. C, initiate safety planning. D, no further action is necessary at this time.
Yeah, I would say she doesn't like want referral service right now in the campus.
Yeah.
Fine.
So C. There is no mandatory reporting of victims of trafficking or sexual exploitation in the case of adults. If this victim were 17 years old and didn't want any help, you have to call CPS. But if it's an adult, you have the right to make your own decisions, and they can use, and you just have to tell them that you're here, they can come back anytime. But you can still get a social worker involved for safety planning. The social worker can help point them towards the right resources. You can also give them the hotline phone number and help them memorize that. There's also a text line that they can text. They can help them set up a bag in order if they need to escape right away. And another thing to note is that a lot of people do decline help. So even some of our patients in the ED who do end up admitting that they're a victim of human trafficking, or they say that they're involved in prostitution, a lot of them don't want to leave that life, and they decline help and these resources for a lot of different reasons. Some don't see themselves as a victim. Some are happy where they're at and think that they're making a lot of money and don't want to live a different life. Some are addicted to drugs and alcohol, and it's the only way that they're able to get that. And some are too scared to leave because they've gotten threats to their family and don't know what's happened if they do end up leaving. And then some don't trust us and don't trust law enforcement. For a long time in this country, victims of human trafficking were seen as criminals. It's nowadays that things are kind of shifting, and we see them as victims and who need our help. A 20-year-old woman presents to the emergency department for acute pelvic pain. The patient reveals that she was raped the previous day and was brought to the ED by her boyfriend, and she was unable to consent. Since this is not the first time this has happened, but it wasn't as bad. She is fearful of her boyfriend and expresses concern about what he will do to her if she isn't able to walk around downtown tonight. Upon exam, her genitalia appear to be lacerated and labia majora are ectopic. While providing the patient information about the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which of the following should she be informed of? A, calling the hotline can help her understand her options and potential resources. B, contacting hotlines initiates her commitment to entering a recovery home. C, discussing her situation with the hotline personnel will initiate a police report. D, hotline resources are only designed for victims who are under the age of 18. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this is the National Human Trafficking Hotline, and calling the hotline will basically just help you with your options and potential resources that can be of use. Also, they can text this be free or help to that number. Right away, you get an automatic message, and then a few seconds later, somebody texts you back saying, "Hi, my name is so-and-so, or a safe place to talk," and they can get help that way. If you call or if you text, you're not locked into any sort of like course of action. You don't have to say anything, say as much as you want. Basically, it's all voluntary. And this year, there have been 48,000 contacts to the national hotline. So, yeah, we could provide this help. Another important contact is the DA's office. This is specifically for Queens County and what the state nurse and social work gives out to our patients. It's also a 24-hour hotline and can help with resources and connecting patients to lawyers. And now I'm just going to go through some of the resources for survivors that social work refers our patients to. These are national organizations who have offices in Portland and help victims of trafficking and other crimes. GEMS is Girls Educational and Mentoring Services. This is an organization that is led by survivors. It provides mentoring, support groups to victims of trafficking. There's also educational initiatives. They help people get their high school diploma, their GED, vocational training work. They have transitional and supportive housing, support advocacy. They provide clothing, escape bags, basically anything. Somebody needs to be referred to GEMS. Usually social work refers them, and you can't be referred if the patient doesn't. The patient has to want to be referred services. The other one is Safe Horizon. So Safe Horizon is used a lot by our social work as well and hobby. So Safe Horizon was started as a witness protection program in 1978. And since today, it's the largest victim services organization in the country and serves victims of every crime involved. Domestic violence, child abuse, sexual assault, stalking, trafficking. It helps homeless children and other crimes. They have an anti-trafficking program, which is dedicated to supporting survivors. And again, they provide counseling, support groups, they provide legal assistance, assistance with basic needs, social services. They operate about 8 shelters in New York City, so they provide housing. So it's also a great resource. This is our last question. A 16-year-old boy presents to the clinic for initiation of HIV pre-exposure prophylaxis. He reports exchanging commercial sex for money after dropping out of high school. He tells you that he was recruited into commercial sex trade by a 25-year-old man whom he previously had a sexual relationship. He feels he is well compensated and has no desire to do the commercial sex trade, so he wishes more of his time content. He gets routinely tested for HIV and other STIs, but knows that he is at increased risk and would like to be better protected. What is the most appropriate next step in the management of this patient? A, check HIV status, creatinine and LFTs. B, prescribe tenofovir or trocytidine and ask the patient to follow up for months. C, report the situation to CPS. D, use open-ended, uninvasive questions to screen. C, yeah, so any minor induced into commercial sex trade is sex trafficking, whether they are a voluntary or not. So, so in summary, when you see a patient in the ED for whatever reason, and you notice one of the red flags that we spoke about today, don't just ignore it. There are a few cases that I'm thinking back to now that were actually kind of recent. One where a girl came in with her boyfriend for like a chronic medical condition. She had TBI. She had like a thrombocytopenia in the past, and so she came in with the TBI. And his boyfriend said that if we made him leave, that she was leaving as well, and should to be. So if you notice any red flags, try and isolate the patient. Just dive a little deeper into it. You may have found a victim of trafficking, and you have the possibility to help them. And this is somebody that was in the news recently, Syntoya Brown. In 2004, she was 16 years old when she was picked up by a solicitor. He brought her to his house, showed her a bunch of his guns. She ended up shooting and killing him. At that time, she was seen as a prostitute. She was tried in adult court, and she was sentenced to life in prison. Recently, with like the outcry of celebrities like Rihanna and Kardashian, it's sad that that's what it takes to bring attention to an issue. She was granted another hearing, and they actually released her after she served 15 years in prison, and now she is in probation. So things are shifting from criminalizing these women and now seeing them as a victim, and kind of trying the pimps and the human traffickers.
Any questions?
Great job. Difficult topic to talk about. I think this really gives a good awareness. So, another just a point about why this is mandatory reporting for domestic violence. A lot of who work in this area say that it also can increase violence in college. So that's why, like New York State, mandatory reporting because you can actually call. Some states do.
I thought you made a good point. I mean, I know it's not mandatory, but like digging in a little deeper as to why they don't want like to have like social work or other services involved.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because if it's something like fear or like hesitancy, maybe that's something you can work on them with to like kind of get them towards that. So I think even though it is like voluntary, kind of digging into why they're declining that is important, because maybe there's a reason of just straight up fear that you can help the system. So I thought that was. Did you, in terms of getting like police involved in terms of like whoever's trafficking them that might be there, did you read anything about that? Or like
Getting police, like if there's somebody in the
yeah, like if you've confirmed that they're being trafficked but they don't want services. Okay.
Because you don't know what's getting into yeah, police involved and patients consent to you doing so and their families. You don't know what kind of threats this is.
Okay. So even if that trafficker is there.
In ED, I think.
Okay. All right. Any other question? The chat said that Gems has a documentary that's actually really good to watch, and I think that's about it. All right. Thank you, Christiane.